move on into our afternoon session here for Codex. I'll let Michael come on ahead and kick that off with us.
Well, I once read an article a while back that if you have a court case and you have your trial right before lunch, there is actual a strong statistical case that you'll have a bad time, and you really want to go after lunch or well before lunch, but that just before lunch when we're all hungry. So hopefully, anyways, now that you're all fed, I'm going to hit it out of the park because everyone's just as satiated and happy. So anyways, what we're going to do is give you a nice little quick sampling of Codex, and then we're going to have some partners talk about their experiences using it and helping us bring it to bear. We did have a consultant who was going to talk to you today from the commercial side. She had a family emergency come up, and so bowed out at the last moment, but we'll still have Matt Schultz from Parks and Wildlife to talk about how they've helped stand up the app with us and provide data to make it all the more meaningful for all of us. And then we'll have someone from Colorado Cattlemen's Agricultural Land Trust and the Natural Resources Conservation Service to wind us out. So why the heck did we do this Codex thing? And it's really to help everyone make better decisions with really high quality decision data and to get the reports that reflect that data. But another thing that, we really need this one-stop shop, but another thing that I'm kind of thinking back to the early days, we had a working group to get a stakeholder process for Codex and really try to find folks from all of our different partners, ranging from the tribes to commercial to industry to researchers here at CSU to help direct these things. And Matt Moorhead with the Nature Conservancy at one meeting brought up this whole idea that it's not just about bringing all the data together that's so meaningful about Codex, it's bringing all these different agencies together and seeing their data together in one place that allows us to sort of catalyze on each other's work and get a better understanding and get closer. The Forest Service, BLM, CNHP, CPW, all these different folks in the room virtually through the data really helps us see connections. And long term, I hope Matt's right. He thinks it's going to be a game changer, not just in terms of the data available, but the overall goal of this meeting and how we come together as partners and how effective we are in doing that. So that's another reason we did it. We did have a lot of partners. We could never have done this alone. NatureServe was the lead developer, and they hosted on Amazon Web Services. And so they developed the code. Over $1 million has been spent in 10 other programs nationally developing this technology. We like to build things ourselves, but in this case, we decided let's go with their solution and bring some custom tools for Colorado and build that on top of what they've built. I've already mentioned CNHP and CPW, obviously key roles. CNHP has a long list of things we do. CPW, besides providing some very important monetary support yearly to make this happen, also provides very critical sensitive species data that make this product as valuable as it is, having the very first time CNHP and CPW sensitive data anytime in Colorado's history so nicely integrated. This is by far the closest we've ever gotten in that effort. And then Keep It Colorado, and particularly in the early days, Colorado Cattlemen's Agricultural Land Trust helped us really nurture some tools that are catered towards the land trust community. And so we had a lot of funding partners, and I'm not going to go over them all on here because just the interest of time, and we are running a little low, but it takes a lot of money to do this. CNHP kicked in a lot, but besides Parks and Wildlife, you can see we had a lot of help here at the university and from across the state, from private foundations to individual donors. The Codex community is really large. I mentioned we had a working group, and for us, I think one of the things, we've looked at a lot of different mapping efforts, and a lot of them have failed, and they look really pretty and never get used. And we saw probably one of the number one things that we had to do to make this work is we had to listen to you and let you help drive the ship. And so that's why we had the working group with a stakeholder process. Most of the groups you see on this community were represented there. And since the working group and launch, we continue to seek out new stakeholder input. And that's a key point about Codex is hopefully it's never done. It's an iterative, incremental project, and we want to respond to the community's needs. We have new layers that will be coming in soon. We're working to bring in hazards layers for fire, floodplains, in addition to what you see there, just as an example, some layers hopefully coming soon. it's taken off. I actually have to admit, as much as this has been a passion project, many of you know me, I've been working at Cnhp for quite a while, and I've been pushing this idea of electronic data delivery almost since I started working here 20 years ago, but in particular the last 10 years. And I've said there's just this starving audience of people who want to be able to get this data. Well, just since November 1st, 214 organizations have signed up on Codex. And you can see the breakdown here. There's, consultants and commercial users are the largest group so far. But when you think that there's 20 state agencies, including one of those agencies is actually in Utah, and 13 universities. We have universities in Boston and California, all across Colorado, in other states. I'm floored. And I mean, who knew HOAs would be that interested in stewarding themselves? We did, because we work with the Gig and Carl Master Association and some other HOAs, but even I was shocked to see 5 HOAs are already using this thing. I mean, those are some eager beavers in those HOAs. And, there's the land trust. We've gone all around the state and done all 4 regions with Keep It Colorado, and we have 14 land trusts already using it regularly. A ton of NGOs ranging from advocacy to more educational. We have education. There's even some secondary education schools signed up, and their students are using it. So it's really rewarding to see this. 517 users signed up so far. Lots of reports being run. Here is the homepage and the URL we keep sharing today. But if you just Google Codex Colorado, you'll surely get right there. This is what the homepage looks like. On the top corner there where it says login is where you would sign up. As of now, it's completely free for all of its features for everyone. We really hope to keep it that way. If we can get some of that foundational kind of support Dave was talking about and enough statewide data partners, it really might be possible. We never even need to charge commercial users. Data wants to be free. Many consultants would love to use data and sometimes avoid it because it costs money. If we can make it happen, I think it's really a viable goal for this group to help make that happen so we never have to charge. But we may one day charge for commercial use in the next number of months if we aren't able to put together something like that. But we'll always have free reports available on some level for everyone. So there will always be free access to Codex on some level. When you log in, you get to see this beautiful map with all these fabulous layers. And many of these layers are in the reports you can run. There's also quite a few of the layers that you can interact with on the map that don't yet have a report that spits out. But the nice thing is, have me come to your organization and do a training like we just did for Keep It Colorado. There's a lot of ways you can just use identify tools, and without ever running a report, you can pull things into tables, you can create PDFs. So it's a really rich tool that has a lot of different ways to save map views and to do kind of power user features. So I think one of the best forms of uptake is just knowing how to use the thing. So really don't be bashful. Dave and I love doing these trainings. We've done them with Fish and Wildlife. We've just finished Keep It Colorado, have done NRCS and State Land Board presentations, and continue doing more and more. So don't be bashful, as I like to say, and hit us up, because it is worth learning. And you'll notice there is a help menu on there. If you go in help, there's a create a report menu, and it's detailed help that should get you going down the road. Also point out, do I have a laser pointer on this thing? Yeah. Oops. There you go. So what was I going to say? Oh yeah, this button right here is the Create Project button. And the Create Project button is where you initiate a report. There's the ROI, and that's a return on investment report. And we'll take a look at what these reports look like, but you can actually run both reports just from the Create Project. And when you get to the bottom of the submission screen, you'll have a chance to tack on that return on investment report, which we'll talk about here in just a sec. So these are the reports that come out. There's 2 primary ones at this point. Soon we'll be adding a conservation planning report when we get the bandwidth to do so. But these reports really get the bulk of the data out of Codex that we all need to do our work. The project report is really where the meat of everything is. It starts with a series of maps. And then it's organized into these main sections. There's regulatory species right on top, the federal stuff that everyone has to pay attention to. And then each section kind of has like, okay, these are the known species. These we think might be there from range maps, general old records. models. And so, we haven't surveyed all the state, but at least, they might be there. And then we have critical habitat under that first regulatory species. And then other species of concern follows that same logic where we have the known occurrences and then the potential. And then we get into special areas and COMAP land status and protection. And this includes everything from like Senate Bill 181 oil and gas special habitat areas to CNHP potential conservation areas, even Audubon bird areas. And so really a lot of different tools there. And water and wetlands, we have a lot of the data that Joanna was talking about this morning, the National Wetlands Inventory, the playas. And so there's a lot of data available there as well. And then the ROI report, which really, Andy's here who worked a lot on this with us, but it's a novel approach to look at how ecosystem services provide value in a conserved ecosystem. Annual benefit is provided by this tool. We don't know your investment, so the ROI part is going to need some math on your part if you want to get the return part, but we can give you the annualized benefit of conserving these lands in terms of ecosystem services based off of the best of our knowledge. So what do these reports look like? I'm just going to have a kind of animated flip through. You get a series of these maps, like a locator map. You get the COMAP maps of the managed land, so you get to see the context of private conservation to public to, and we're looking at Pingree here, so since we're at CSU, we might as well look at Pingree. So here's the wetlands. There's also a map that's a custom map, so any of the layers you have on that layer palette, you can make a map by user, and so I had turned on the wetland features for this one, so we could see the wetland features around CSU's mountain campus. And so then you get into the reports, and this is, like I said, the main headings, the regulatory species, and then you work your way down. But I want to point out just how data rich these are too, and there's a lot of information kind of within these tables. You'll notice the hyperlinks on the species. Those go to NatureServe Explorer, so you want to get deep taxonomic information, you want to get best bibliographical sources, you want to see broader range maps. If you've used Explorer Pro, you know how data rich it is, so those will hyperlink to those species. In addition, we have the global and state rarity ranks that Amy was talking about earlier. They're the heritage ranking system that gives you both global and state rarity. The viability rank, where available for heritage data, talks about, is that a historic occurrence like we're seeing in this table? Is it an A-rated, just great, strong, healthy occurrence for this species? That kind of thing. Last observation, and then special statuses. So does it have an Endangered Species Act protection? But more broadly than that, is it a SWAP Tier 1, Tier 2 species, the greatest conservation need? Maybe it's on the BLM or Forest Service sensitive species list. Maybe it's on Colorado's sensitive species list. All of that information can be captured in this table. And then the Cnhp identifiers just for our records, in case you need support on something that comes up, you can identify that record number and we can just plow right into it. The data source is your key to see when this data was pulled into the app and is it CNHP, is it CPW, that kind of thing. And thankfully I'm almost done. So other species of concern follows the exact same logic. We have our documented occurrences and then our potential occurrences in the next table. So finally, we kind of get to the end of this report in the special areas and land status. And so here's the potential conservation areas and other special areas. You see these Senate Bill 181s coming in there. Again, hyperlinks this time are driving you to CNHP's site of why is this a potential conservation area. Table 7 is managed areas within the project area. So basically, what did COMAP find in my project area? And then the wetland info from much of what was on CWIC in terms of the NWI and playas. And then for the ROI report, we use the National Land Cover data set to type all the different cover types within your project. And then using Dr. Slidell's work, what we do is we associate economic values with each of these cover types. And so here's an example report for, I believe this is the Pingree, and you can see that that piece of land is doing on the order of 1.8 million to 4.1 million a year in ecosystem services. This range is so broad because It is frontier science, and we're trying to be honest with you. We know it's really valuable, but we're not going to try to overstate it. Just like when we did the study of conservation easements in Colorado and found $4 to $12 for every dollar Colorado's invested and private conservation comes back, you can now run these reports on your own parcels, whether you're a local open space program or just an interested landowner that's working with Colorado State Forest Service and wants to see what a conservation project would do. So with that, we're ready to pass it over to our speakers. And that's my part done. Matt, you want to come up since you're here? Great. So here's Matt Schultz with Colorado Parks and Wildlife to talk about their use of the product and support of it.
Yeah, cool. Hey, thanks for having me here. I did want to say I'm amazed at how positive you guys have kept it with CNHP today. I was kind of wondering if we were going to start in with the airing of grievances. Maybe that's the afternoon session. I don't know. Yeah. But no, I mean, my only grievance is really that there's not more of you wonderful people to work with. And so John Hayes, if you're out there still, let's add some staff. Yeah, so as you've heard, Codex is launched. Hopefully you're using it, and please tell your friends. I did want to acknowledge and take the opportunity just to acknowledge the amount of work that it took to get here. CNHP first broached this idea with us in the fall of 2017. So about 4 years to get it launched. And I don't know whether to be proud about that or sad about that. It's probably average for government work, I suppose. It did take a bit for us to get consensus just internally with CPW. And so working with a lot of our staff, and thanks to Mike Sherman, I don't see him around, he might have left, but and Raquel Wurtzbaugh, just for helping, help my thinking evolve on this tool and help me sell it to the rest of CPW staff. So that was super beneficial. And then we had a lot of work to do with our Attorney General's office, the Office of Information Technology, our GIS folks. And I just wanted to say thanks to CNHP for their incredible perseverance and patience with us as we kind of worked all of this out. So that update of there being 500 users, 200 organizations, I think that's really incredible for a tool that's just been live for 3 months. And I'm sure that'll just continue to grow over time. So that's awesome. And CPW is committed to ensuring that we can keep this tool as relevant as possible for the foreseeable future. We have a interagency agreement in place to fund the maintenance of the tool for the next 5 years, and 5 years is kind of the max that we're allowed to do on agreements, but we do intend to maintain this for way longer than that. And thanks to Dave Clute in the back for helping fund part of this, and then with our Trails program as well. And I think if you look at the primary challenges that we have in the state related to conservation, I think Codex is really well suited to play a key role in many of those discussions. Whether it's the climate change and resiliency work, land use decisions to support an exploding population, or how we connect residents to protected lands through trails and other recreational opportunities, while still maintaining the rarest components of our natural heritage. So all of those conversations with really, start with figuring out what you know about a piece of land, and this tool does a great job for informing us on that. The CPW is working on a regional partnerships initiative that will bring together local groups to help guide local thinking and decisions around recreation and conservation in their area of interest. And these groups will be provided some Codex training and support by CNHP, and they're going to be utilizing some philanthropy money through CPW for that, which is exciting. That's kind of a new program for us. And yeah, so thanks a ton for those trainings and all the other trainings that you guys have been working on to get this in the hands of the people that need it. Within CPW, we've got some grant programs that are looking at using this for as part of their grant applications. And the wetlands grant is a big one. And thanks to Brian Sullivan for his leadership on making Codex a requirement of that grant. And then we're also talking to our trails program and our real estate program to how we can integrate Codex into those operations as well. And I would just close by saying we're working on an update to the CPW data that is included in the tool. We're looking to provide updates twice a year, so in the spring and the fall. And I'm hopeful that we can get the data to CNHP by the end of the month so that that can be loaded in at some point in April. So be on the lookout for that. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Matt. We're really proud to be able to work with Parks and Wildlife, and this has definitely been one of the more fulfilling, cool projects I've gotten to work at CNHP on. So is Christine from the Natural Resources Conservation? Yep, there she is. Great. So Christine Newton's going to talk about how NRCS is using Codex in their work already. So thanks for coming up.
Are my slides loaded?
They should be ready to go when you click next. It's kind of, yep, other direction.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, my name's Christine Newton. I'm a conservation agronomist with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. If you aren't familiar with our agency, we're a relatively small agency that's housed under the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Most of the work that we do involves working with private landowners who own or operate working lands. And so we help them with projects in the form of technical assistance as well as financial assistance to implement conservation projects on their property while making sure we're keeping them productive and working. And so those types of projects range anywhere from forest management projects, because we work with non-industrial private forest landowners, to irrigation efficiency improvements, maybe transitioning from a wild flood system to a more efficient system, such as a center pivot irrigation or drip system, as well as large-scale brush management projects, wildlife projects, nutrient management plans, waste storage. So you name it, if it happens on working lands, we're trying to assist producers to implement conservation projects. So I first got introduced to Codex by being part of that working group, and that was a really fun group to be part of. As you would leave these meetings, your wheels started turning and how a tool like this would be extremely useful and relevant to the work that we do as an agency. And Michael mentioned one of the biggest advantages of us being having a formal agreement and having access to Codex is just having that reliable data in a one-stop shop. It really increases our efficiency. We can count on this data. We don't have to maintain this data or gather it from all these different sources. So that is really the biggest advantage that we see so far. How we use the data is mostly with our environmental evaluation. So while we are working on private lands, we do have to adhere by NEPA. So our environmental evaluations that we have to do, we have to look at how these projects could potentially adversely affect some of those special environmental resource concerns and resources that are out there. And so we have the ability to pull in this data prior to project implementation during the planning phase, just to analyze what could be out there and how our projects could impact these resources. So that's predominantly how we're using it right now. Again, it's pretty brand new. We're still training up our employees. We also use it with easement acquisition. We do a variety of conservation easements, often as a third party, but it helps us to make sure that when we procure these easements, we're maximizing conservation benefits. So this is a really good tool to be able to ensure that we're protecting and preserving lands that have the highest conservation benefit, as well as it helps with our easement monitoring. And then the last program that we foresee great utility with this product is our emergency watershed protection program. very quick moving program in terms of federal programs. Usually after a large scale disturbance such as wildfire or flooding, this program comes in swiftly and tries to rehab and restore those lands after that disturbance. And so having this data there really helps speed up that environmental analysis. Another huge utility of this program is just the in-office reconnaissance that we do prior to going out and walking the lands with our producers. So again, we work with individual landowners. We go out there, we drive around in the trucks with them, walk their fence lines, do full-on resource inventories of their land, just so we have a good idea of what's going on out there. So the ability for us to do this in the office before we go out there helps us build relationships with our producers. You know, we can show that we're invested, we've learned about their property. We might even be able to teach them about things they didn't even know were on their lands. And so that is a really cool aspect of this tool. Right now, we've had 2 trainings, thank you guys, in the fall. So we're still in the process of training up our employees. We have about 20% of our staff has logged in and created a username and have accessed it. So by the end of fiscal year 2022, we do have a target of 50% of our folks being logged in. And we're never going to achieve 100 because not all of our employees do this type of work. So here are some of the data sets that we use and that we access for our NEPA analysis. You can see a lot of them are already in Codex now. So these are kind of the layers that we're using mostly. And then for future development, maybe we can expand upon our relationship with you guys by acquiring more data to help us do our work. So with that, just in terms of the partnership, we really appreciate it. Not only you guys are extremely pleasant to work with, but you've provided training, you've provided product support and answered all our questions. So really look forward to maintaining that relationship. And last shout out to my colleague who should actually be up here today, Crystal Phillips. She's the one who really took the reins and got this agreement set in place. So thank you guys.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brendan Voepl. I'm the Director of Additive Conservation for the Colorado Cattlemen's Agricultural Land Trust, and I have the very easy task of talking about how great this tool is and how much of a positive experience we've had just even in 3 months. Quickly, CCALT works with agricultural producers across the entire state of Colorado to protect farm and ranch land. To date, we've protected over 700,000 acres across the state, about 350 individual conservation easements. We continue to see as much demand as we've ever seen. If you aren't aware, the Colorado State Conservation Easement Tax Credit was changed last year in favor of landowners, and it is a very appealing situation to conserve your land at the moment. So we are seeing nearly another 100,000 acres in the pipeline right now, and it's just a question of those tax credits being there and our staff having the time to conserve that land and work through those projects. So this really couldn't come at a better time. This really does free our staff up to focus on other aspects of projects. So I did want to kind of talk about particularly the efficiency that we're seeing thus far. You know, we just brought on 2 new project managers last month, one of which knows GIS, the other one does not. That's been a requirement for years to have a GIS background to do land conservation work. And as we think about inclusivity and accessibility, is that really necessary that you need to have this very in-depth knowledge of a skill in software like ArcMap and things like that? And so there, you know, we can get more folks working on conservation. I'm sure some of you have seen some horrible looking GIS servers over the years. We can just sort of avoid all of that now and trying to keep track of data. We don't have to worry about making sure we've got the most recent COMAP layer. Codex just has it in there. And we had a shock last week where we realized we're going to have to switch to Arc Pro soon. So all these people that knew Arc Map are now sort of out in the cold trying to figure that out. And this really helps us out at a critical time. So I really can't say enough great things about how it makes our work easier. And it is really enabling good conservation across the state. It's allowing us to focus on interacting with landowners, getting projects done, writing grants, and moving forward on some really key conservation easement projects across the state. My second point is this is a really great foundation for good things to come as well. As we talk about alternative valuation, the ROI, return on investment table that Michael had shown before, I would much rather try and compensate a landowner for their ecosystem services than just their loss of real estate value. And that's sort of how a conservation easement works. There's some rural parts of the state that have huge amounts of biodiversity and ecosystem service values, and the conservation easement really isn't set up for protecting those areas. So as we move towards alternative valuation, ecosystem service markets, this is the tool we need, and this is the foundation we need to start with. So just in my last point, I really do think this is the sort of often sought after and rarely found intersection between conservation science, data, and applied conservation. This is really great, bringing all these sources together, allowing us to stay current on the data that's out there and use it. It's just been a great experience, even in the first 3 months. So can't say enough great things about Codex. We have always really appreciated the relationship with CNHP, and I think this is a great sign of good things to come. So thank you very much, Michael, Dave, and the whole CNHP team for the Codex tool. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Christine, Matt, and Brendan. What wonderful words those were to hear. And our partnership with you in making Codex go has been a true joy, and we couldn't do it without you. And so thank you so much for everything that you're doing. I think that their talks bring us into the right headspace here to start thinking about our afternoon workshop of the next 10 years of conservation, and put us in a good space to hear a presentation by Vanessa Mazal with the DNR, who's leading the state's efforts on thinking about the 30 by 30. And I thought, what better person to lead us into our workshop this afternoon on the next 10 years of conservation, because Vanessa's at the very cutting edge of that exciting forefront. So I'm going to turn it over to Vanessa.
Yeah, no pressure, right, David? It's never ideal to wander into a conference just, moments before you have to step up to the podium, but that's what happened to me today. And I apologize because I did notice as I'm doing my last minute run through, well, first of all, I'm too short for this, but second of all, I did like a couple of my slides and the conversion definitely got a little wonky, unfortunately. That's okay. We'll make it through this. So here's my clicker. Thank you.
Find the button on the right.
Let's see if we can get this going. Oh, there it goes. As David mentioned, I'm Vanessa Mazal. I'm a policy advisor in the Department of Natural Resources. I am not leading the state's efforts because nobody is really leading the state's efforts yet in terms of our engagement on 30 by 30 and the broader kind of statewide conservation initiative. However, I've been coordinating across state agencies and with partners in the kind of conservation community coalition that are also really interested in this initiative. Just to manage your expectations, I'm going to definitely leave you with more questions than answers to this topic, but hopefully it'll be fodder for our next workshop session. So diving in. Just to give some context, I know that this initiative may be new to some of you. This is kind of the 101 version, so it may be a little bit redundant for others. But 30 by 30 is shorthand for a goal that was initially identified in a report that accompanied the Paris climate agreements, suggesting that conserving 30% of the Earth's lands and waters and by waters, they were primarily talking about marine waters and coastal areas, but also inland waters are part of this too. Conserving 30% of the Earth's essentially land area for the purposes of biodiversity is really a viable strategy for reversing biodiversity loss and restoring ecosystem services and ecosystem functionality in some of our key ecosystems. This was initially a framework that it's been adopted by the Convention on Global Biodiversity, CBD, also known as, kind of never really made that connection before. The Convention on Biodiversity is a UN, it's a UN sub-treaty within the UN Environment Program. And 30 by 30 is a key milestone that has been adopted as part of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework on the path toward 50% conservation by 2050. It's structured around several goals, but I would sort of summarize them as safeguarding genetic diversity, restoring ecosystem functionality, promoting equitable conservation benefits, and ultimately improving implementation capacity on the part of countries and other jurisdictions. The US is one of, let's see if my clicker works, 2 countries that has not ratified the convention. Any guesses as to who the other might be? If you say Russia, you'll be wrong. Brazil? Nope. Guess what? The Holy See. And that's probably because they don't have, a whole lot of land to conserve, I think. So anyway, interesting factoid that you guys can take with you. So the post-2020 framework, which has also been dubbed a global deal for nature, the international community has really kind of rallied around this. 92 countries have formally adopted 30 by 30 goals, even though the full framework is still under negotiation. So we're kind of, building the ship as we sail it, and folks are going forth and implementing these 30 by 30 commitments at the country level and also at subnational levels, provincial, state, and also local jurisdictional levels. Even though the framework is very much still being negotiated and there's kind of a lot of outstanding questions. I wanted to just let you know that this target, the 30 by 30 target, actually builds upon a previous target, and this will make sense in a minute. We called the previous framework the previous framework that was dubbed the sort of decade of biodiversity framework from 2010 to 2020 was called the Aichi Targets, and some of you may be familiar with those. They're a series of conservation, ecosystem-related targets, social, socioeconomic targets that are all related to achieving biodiversity goals. The reason I point out target number 11 is because this really is the hitch. I'll read it out loud just for those who may not be in the room, but the goal was to conserve 17% of terrestrial and inland waters and 10% of coastal and marine areas. And this is where I get into the fun stuff, especially areas important for biodiversity and ecosystem services conserved through effectively, equitably managed, ecologically representative, and well-connected systems of protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures and integrated into wider landscapes and seascapes. And I've highlighted in orange the components of this that are vague and have been dramatically contested, and the reason that monitoring and reporting against these targets has been such a debacle. So there are a couple of pitfalls in particular of this area-based conservation target, and this is not to suggest that the work that you guys all do in identifying spatial conservation outcomes is not valuable. It's incredibly valuable, but when we're relying exclusively on area-based measures or indicators, there have been a number of questions that have come up and that the global community has really been grappling with, and these include what counts as conservation. There are different divergent interpretations of this throughout, between countries, within countries, across countries. So there's been a lot of inconsistency in terms of reporting. And also a real sense that there have been inequitable conservation benefits because a lot of the most protective tools have been applied by countries that have, or rather by folks who are kind of politically influential within countries and are able to sort of prioritize their own conservation goals. So that's thing one. And thing two, which is related, they call the protected area bias. And similarly, this is the notion that in a lot of countries, and I don't know if there's been studies about this in the US, but certainly in a lot of countries, they've tended to conserve in order to meet the 30% or whatever target. They've tended to conserve kind of lower value conservation or land areas, places that may not have anything to do with biodiversity outcomes or threatened species or any number of other objectives. So there's a mismatch between, if you look at the global protected area network, a real mismatch between some of our high priority areas and those areas that actually have designated conservation mechanisms. And then third, this is, I guess these are all kind of very closely related, which is why this is a meaty topic, is just this similar goal or similar critique that when you're talking about protected area as just, a spatial target, you're really missing a more nuanced look at what those conservation outcomes might be. So those other many land or many spatial layers that you guys just ticked through a moment ago, those don't really get captured in those spatial conservation or protected area conservation representations. And then finally, there's the question which I alluded to about how do we take this global, is that 3 minutes? Okay. How do we take this global framework and then apply it at the jurisdictional level? So I will cruise through. In response to this, the Biden administration, through an executive order in January 2021, issued directed federal agencies, including some of the folks here, to lay plans to conserve 30% of the nation's lands and waters. This has been this was taken up in a report that was spearheaded by DOI and an interagency group, and they've now dubbed it the America the Beautiful initiative, because 30 by 30 has its own sort of controversies. All right, let's see. Oh, we're stuck. So rather than, the administration put forth a set of questions that they wanted input on for an atlas that was going to be coming forth as part of the America the Beautiful initiative. And this was just recently issued in January. And I'm going to get into just a second the state's kind of comments on this. But they were looking for some particular information with respect to what kinds of data and attributes and data sources and technical standards. How do we capture those outcomes? What's the meaningful continuum or types of mechanisms that should be reflected or captured? And then finally, how do we partner with states and tribes and local governments and other stakeholders? So as you know, the GAP project or the gap analysis project by the USGS is predominantly used as the protected area database. We found some inconsistencies and challenges with this as just, in and of itself. I think that there are challenges with all of these kinds of tools, but within GAP, within the 4 categories of GAP, really only the first 2 that have the most durable and permanent protections, which they've really, sort of set aside wilderness and national parks and other things, and very, very stringent conservation easements. Those get considered kind of conserved, whereas the whole spectrum of other conservation tools, including conservation, agricultural conservation easements and local open space designations and other things, those things get sort of left off. And our critique has been that that's a real challenge that doesn't reflect the way that we really need to do work in Colorado, and the way that, if you look at this, that's sort of the PAD-US database in Colorado. You can see that the dark green areas are the most protected areas. The whiteness is really the vast majority of the state, and we're, by this standard, at 11%. The idea of how we get from 11% to 30% within the next decade is really, almost impossible to conceive. So we have concerns about relying too heavily on that framework. Instead, we've suggested that the administration really revisit this sort of durability metric, which we don't think necessarily always legal enforceability and permanence don't always need to be present to affect conservation outcomes on the ground. So we really want the administration to look at more flexible tools. We also want them to weight in terms of priority, so we can give more credit, if you will, toward priority areas like wetlands and other places that are really at risk. And then finally, to expand the inclusion of other effective conservation tools. And I'll cruise through those, but one of them that's missing right now is the state wildlife area designation. Those tools are not reflected. In terms of collaboration, we just think it's important that the administration really work very closely with states and tribes and all of you. We also think it's important that they designate data centers that are kind of the filters and partners, key partners within the states. And we would certainly recommend that that would be Cnhp, would be certainly well positioned. And then finally, that they really invest in expanding capacity so that we can have better accuracy, more comprehensive data and yeah, just, in order to be able to report upward. So there's a lot of outstanding questions. I just wanted to leave two with you real quick. One of them is, how do we better tie our management classifications, for example, those in COMAP, to actual conservation outcomes? Can we look at those? Is there a way that we can look through the lens of those codes and understand kind of what types of priorities might be conserved? And then the second one, which I think no one has cracked, the nut of Western water. When they talked about protecting inland waters, they were really not thinking about prior appropriation in the Western system of governance. So folks are really grappling with whether or not we're focused on quality or quantity, or if we're just really focused on those priority ecosystem types, how we kind of balance those things. So your thoughts about that, I think, are also really welcome. And I'll close with that. I think I went through pretty fast, so feel free to corner me later if you have questions.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Thanks for setting me straight here too on your roles. And thank you very much. That was an absolutely perfect way to tee up our conversation here for the rest of this afternoon.